Yeah. But anyway, at those times, we had been talking for years of what we were going to do, and my vision on that in Winston's, let's, and obviously under the influence of Harvey, let's take our instrument to another level. That's what we all tried to do, and we wanted to communicate with people all over the world. And at that time, the only thing you had was a telephone and letters, and we spent a lot of money calling and talking, and
hard to believe.
There was no communication between and amongst tubists, because if you played in an orchestra somewhere, you were the only tuba player in town, and the next closest tuba player was 150, 200, 300 miles away, and the next one was another 300 miles away, and there was no motivation. No one was collectively working to generate repertoire, to work on the improvement of the instruments, to try and improve the possibility of employment. And these were all the motivations for forming TUBA, the things that I just mentioned, to come up with better repertoire. Remember the book that I mentioned earlier that Bill Bell and I did in 1965. I remember the discography for that book that listed all the tuba recordings available in 1965. I think there were seven recordings, LPs for those of you that don't remember, that featured the tuba. 7. And of course right now there are 200, 300, 400 tuba CDs.
At least everybody's doing
it. And there were only 7. Bill Bell's had come out in 1957. Harvey's was shortly after that. Peter Popeil had one out. Rex Connor had one out. And there were 2 or 3 other scraggly ones. There were 7 recordings that you could listen to in those days. The tuba ensemble section, which I knew quite intimately about, had maybe about 5 or 6 pages, and that's not like single lines. Each one would maybe be about 3 or 4 on a page of tuba duets, trios, maybe a couple of quartets. And I even made up some stuff just to throw in there, just to have something in the book. But that's how pathetic the repertoire for the instruments were in 1965.
It was color television.
It was, absolutely. It was pathetic. So that was a strong motivation for starting the TUBA, to get the manufacturers on board to improve the quality of the instruments and the consistency of the instruments. Dan can tell you, if you had 30 Alexanders sitting there, which is a real popular instrument, there'd be 1 or 2 great ones, 3 or 4 usable ones, and then 10 or 20 pieces of junk.
At that particular time, all the tubas made, they were quite good, but the 5th partial was so doggone flat. You have to use Chinese fingerings. Try to play Carnival Venice on that stuff. It was impossible.
Well, Dan and I were in the Army together, and he was playing Alexander at the time, and he got involved with the European tuba thing and helped me get my first tuba, and you made those connections to Europe
actually,
that really helped modernize things.
Well, what happened was Fred Merrick was starting the business of Custom Music Company at that time, and he wanted to, who can I get to help do this? And Jake suggested, why don't you team up with Parantoni and Tucci? He talked to me about it, and I was an educator at the time. And
what was Bob doing at that time?
Bob was actually, he was over in this country, but he played in Vienna.
Yeah.
He played in Vienna, and he started to have connections over there. And we knew a couple. Fred had already, it was amazing. Fred he'd go over there and all of a sudden discover Rudy Mano. And that was our first one, you know what I mean? And then he discovered Peter Hirschman. I don't know how he did it, because he knew nothing about instruments except he had a love to develop it. I mean, he also had money. Which the bottom line is you get him to do that. So Bob and I got involved with Rudy Mano, and I think the time what we met in '69 at Midwest, I was already involved as a clinician, and I remember meeting Bill Bell actually for the first time. I never knew him, and that's how we got together. And I had Rudy Mano over there, and we got Rudy Mano with Jake, and start helping him with those tubas at that particular time. Now, our goal was, if we can get one making a little bit more instrument, and in the United States, no one would talk to us because they didn't want to do anything with the tuba. You can make 3 trumpets, make a hell of a lot more money, and there's a lot of physical work, and they didn't want to do it. So we went to Europe. And, one thing led to another. We figured, hey, well, Rudy, if we get some good lings out there, then Miraphone is going to come in and get a little bit more work. And he did,
Yeah.
And we'd play this one against this one in a best possible sense just to try to get it going. I remember back then there was only one mouthpieces, and I took a look at a trumpet player, and the guy had all these stuff, and I said, I want that, Why can't
had
we
a
do
Hellebird.
it? Yeah, well, which is good. We had a Hellebird.
Or a Bach 24 or 18 or a Hellebird. That was it. Those were
mean,
the-
Fun too.
yeah.
But all of us had little goals in a sense. We were already involved in it, and of course, this all came, and we got together with Harvey at these kind of things, and we talk about it. And why don't you do this?
But that was the purpose behind
That's
TUBA.
purpose.
That was what TUBA was all about, to get all these people with these different goals working for a common cause and working to accomplish something for the instrument, and have one organization there that could, and it's worked, guys.
Yeah.
It's really worked. Look at the repertoire,
so
what
proud
we've
of
done
this,
with the repertoire, and since in 40, 45 years, look what's happened to the quality of the instruments, the number of the instruments, and other
Look
than the
what's
current
happened.
economic situation, the job situation, as far as the military stuff and orchestral stuff and academic,
Look at the
position for
level of
euphoniums
play.
and tubas, these
Oh,
things
yeah.
didn't exist 40 years ago.
The
At all.
level of playing.
Level playing. I mean,
Well, it's
and
of course.
I have to go.
Phenomenal.
Yeah.
Phenomenal. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't think there's any instrument that's certainly not any of the brass instruments, but almost any other instrument that's had this kind of growth in the last time.
Well, Harvey always referred to it as a tuba renaissance, which is a little misleading because renaissance means rebirth. That assumed that you'd ever been born in the first place. And so the tuba, as we know, was invented in 1835, and then but wasn't until 1955 that Paul Hindemith and Von Williams wrote major works for the instrument. So, I mean, by the time I was a high school kid in the late 50s, that there was only one recording, Bill Bell, and there were only two major pieces of music that had ever been composed for the instrument at that point in time. And you look at what people have now available to them, a lot of that, and the bulk of that, and people don't give TUBA or ITEA credit for it. And ITEA is responsible, the organization, the existence of that organization. Now, people did fight it originally. And tuba players were very independent. Tuba players were very, very independent. Roger's thing was, what, are we the way we are because we are tuba players, or are we tuba players because that's the way we are? But when you only got, you're the only tuba player in the orchestra, and then the next tuba player is 300 miles away, you become very independent. And survival, you got survival skills. And that's why, you're highly motivated. Look how many tuba players ended up being the personnel managers of the orchestras and stuff because they were motivated to do that.
There's
and
a lot.
deans.
Yeah.
And deans of universities.
Right, yeah.
Well, the interesting thing is back in those times, we weren't taken too seriously as university professors, you know what I mean? And you had to work on that because it was a fact or a thought that anybody in the professional world, you could either teach or you could play. Right. So so they thought, well, you weren't taken too seriously because if you're in a university you can't play. And I'm talking about the guys.
Not just a university, Dan. As a tubist, even among other musicians, the tuba was looked down on as some kind of lowly third cousin of some kind.
And the trumpets, and it went in all that instrument. So the academic thing, well, you can teach, but you can't play.
Well, Harvey's position on that was it's based on the repertoire of the instrument, and and if the best thing you got going for you is Beelzebub or
Sleeping at
If He
Deep.
Takes a Walk or whatever, if that's the top repertoire that you've got, and then the other musicians, they've got Mozart concertos and Strauss concertos and whatever else, and they look at the tuba and then they look at the repertoire. I say, well, it can't be a serious instrument because no one's ever written for it. So that was the motivation to get the repertoire where it is today.
Dan and I both went to the Catholic University for our master's degrees in Washington because we were connected through the Army Band
And
there.
they paid for it.
And they paid for it, and but I finished, and I said I wanted to get a DMA. They would not let me do it, and the reason was because they didn't think there was a literature. I wrote a big paper trying to justify it. They still said no. A few years later, of course, they
What
offered a
What
DMA.
year was that?
67 is the year I got my master's, but
Me
that
too.
would have been 68, 69.
Yeah. And at that
before
point, the
I went to
repertoire
Texas.
was still in its infancy. So
Just a few years later, and so that drove me to other places.